Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode, we're talking about college football bowl game predictions and analytics, and this is going to be the final part, other than the championship game, which we won't really know about until next week. This is going to be the final addition to the college football matchups this week in terms of analytics and data. Now, as you may or may not know, if you're new to the channel, each week I collect all of the college football team data in order to analyze and project potential college football performance. And since it's a weekly collection, there's always going to be some variation between various data points. However, there's always going to be little nuggets of truth that could become bigger nuggets of truth as the season continues. So let's begin with this week. All terms and definitions are in the description as well. So if there's any sort of thing I'm talking about today that you're not familiar with, you can just go to the description and you'll find out all the information that you need for that stuff in the description. So starting with the games this week, we're looking at a bunch of games. I mean, so far I have 25 matchups that I'm going to go through, and we're just going to kind of go through the quick and dirty in terms of who the data favors and stuff like that. So the first matchup for the 25 games this week is Utah versus West Virginia. Based on the data in this particular game, the data that matters the most, which is the O/DPts score, which you can look in the description for how that score is formulated. Most of the data favors Utah, 67.91 to 56.61 for West Virginia. The only thing I would worry about is the fact that West Virginia does have a better offense, and statistically speaking, the better offense typically wins games versus the team that has a better defense. So this is actually a particular game where I think Utah is a much more balanced team, but West Virginia definitely could get the upper hand considering that they have the better overall offense. And then, of course, we get to Duke versus Northern Illinois. Based on the data in this particular game, it's Duke 64.19 to 82.67 for Northern Illinois. So basically, Northern Illinois is pretty heavily favored here when it comes to that particular game. And then, of course, you get Kansas State versus UCLA. In this game, Kansas State is 68.82 to UCLA, who is 40.59. Another game very similar to the Utah-West Virginia game. UCLA has the better offense compared to Kansas State, but Kansas State has a much more balanced overall team when it comes to defense and those other sort of areas. So that's definitely one of those, or at least that's definitely one of those particular matchups that I think is going to be interesting because of the dynamic there. And then, of course, we get to Florida State versus Southern Miss. In this particular game, it's 64.86 for Florida State, 72.29 for Southern Mississippi. The only thing I would say is Florida State may end up winning this game just because they played a much tougher schedule. Florida State pretty much played one of the toughest schedules in college football this year, and even though their statistics are not amazing, Florida State still has a very good shot of becoming, very good overall when you look at they have a decent shot of winning this game because of the fact that they just played kind of a tougher schedule, which might have hurt their statistics versus a team like Southern Miss. Then, of course, we get to Boston College versus Iowa. This game in particular, 59.60 Boston College to 77.75 in Iowa. Iowa obviously favored in this game based on that data. Then, of course, you get Arizona versus Purdue. 56.18 for Arizona, and then 62.11 for Purdue. So that's definitely another sort of game where there's a lot of data that kind of favors a lot of things, but it's kind of even. So I actually would say that Arizona Purdue is kind of a toss-up game. It's one of those games that honestly could go either way. And then, of course, you get Missouri versus Texas. 59.80 for Missouri versus 75.72 for Texas. Texas is favored in this game, but I do think it's going to be a interesting game just because of Missouri's offense having a couple things kind of going their way a bit when it comes to their offense overall. Then, of course, we get to Navy versus Virginia. Navy's favored in this game, 48.89 to 32.38. So I definitely expect a Navy victory here just because of their offense compared to Virginia. Oklahoma State versus Virginia Tech. Oklahoma State is 70.32 to Virginia Tech. That is 88.47. So this is definitely a game where I would actually kind of side with Virginia Tech for the most part. Then we get to Michigan State versus Washington State. 54.97 for Michigan State versus 72.78 for Washington State. So in many ways, I would actually say that this is pretty much going to go to Washington State just because of a better offense and better overall feel for the game. Then we get to Stanford versus TCU. TCU is pretty much favored in this game. It's 85.67 to 94.21 for Texas Christian. So definitely kind of more so favors TCU in that particular matchup. We got Texas A&M versus Wake Forest, 52.61 to 71.48 in that particular game. So definitely kind of more so interest in that kind of perspective. Then, of course, you get Arizona State versus North Carolina State, 47.10 to Arizona State versus 68.58 for North Carolina State. So definitely more so goes to North Carolina State there. Then we get to Kentucky versus Northwestern, 32.58 to 83.93 for Northwestern. So Northwestern definitely kind of favored there based on the overall data and outlook. Then we get to New Mexico State versus Utah State, 41.89 to 59.889 for Utah State. So Utah State's favored in that game. Ohio State versus USC. Probably the game that I'm actually most interested in seeing for draft prospect-wise. But definitely a game that's more 96.86 for Ohio State, 73.50 for USC. So Ohio State is actually favored in this particular game. We'll see how it turns out, though. When we get to Louisville versus Mississippi State, this game is 74.74 to 88.13 for Mississippi State. So definitely kind of a wishy-washy kind of game to say the least in terms of who might win. The only thing I would say is that Louisville, their offense is superior. So Mississippi State's a little bit more balanced, but again, balanced teams sometimes don't always win against teams that are very offensive heavy at times. So that's definitely kind of the main concern I have in that game is that Louisville, even though they're not favored, they have an offense that could definitely push them over the top. Then we get into Iowa State versus Memphis, 80.89 for Iowa State to 60.09 for Memphis. So Iowa State has a pretty substantial favorability. However, Memphis has a very impressive offense. So again, it's another one of those games where I think it's a little bit of a toss-up because of how good Memphis's offense has been. They're just kind of able to overcome some of the discrepancies they have in terms of their defense. And then, of course, you get to Penn State versus Washington, 99.37 for Penn State versus 98.55 for Washington. So slight advantage for Penn State, but this is definitely a game that I think can kind of go either way based on the overall data. And then, of course, you get to Miami versus Western Michigan, 81.90 for Miami versus 60.28 for Western Michigan. This game, Miami's pretty much favored for the most part. Then we get to Michigan versus South Carolina, which always reminds me of Jadeveon Clowney, when he faced South Carolina that one year and had that big hit that just kind of made a name for himself. But that game in particular, 72.73 to 56.90. So Michigan is definitely favored in that game. So I definitely expect Michigan to get a W there. Then we get to Auburn versus Central Florida. Definitely a very interesting game to watch. Auburn has played a tougher schedule, so that's kind of the biggest thing that goes in their favor. 96.09 to 87.50 for UCF. But this is definitely going to be a very fun game to watch just because there's a lot of people talking about should UCF have been in the Final Four, Should they be in the final 8? So this is a game that I think will say a lot about the future of non-Power 5 teams possibly sneaking in or getting into the discussion for national championship potential. Then we get to LSU versus Notre Dame, which is 79.63 for LSU, 91.07 for Notre Dame. So Notre Dame definitely favored here. And then we get to the national championship games. This is very tough. It's always tough to predict these games because the teams are so evenly matched. But the way things are kind of matching up right now, Georgia is favored over Oklahoma, 97.39 to 87.45. The only question mark is that Oklahoma has a much better offense than Georgia, and in many ways, having a much better offense, a much more efficient offense, can be the deciding factor in winning games. So even though Oklahoma's defense is not amazing, it may not matter if if Baker Mayfield in particular is just able to go off and do his thing, if you will. So that's definitely kind of the biggest sort of worry I have in that game. And then the final game, of course, is Alabama versus Clemson. This game is 99.52 for Alabama, 98.02 for Clemson. This game could go either way. Alabama has the better offense in terms of the ability to put points on the board, but this is definitely going to be a very interesting game to see what happens because these teams are almost dead on even when it comes to their data. So definitely a very interesting game to watch and see what happens because and of course, lots of implications with it. So overall, those are the data points for the week. I know it was a lot of information, a lot of me talking about all these particular matchups. You don't have to do that per se. You can just look at the data and make your own conclusions about things. And that's why I left all the terms and definitions in the description so you could do that stuff. But yeah, that was all the picks for the week in terms of analytics. I think the last video I'm going to do is a wrap-up video, which is just going to focus on the final playoff game. But after that point, it'll be pretty much the end of the season. I'm going to do a final analysis in terms of how I did the entire year in terms of pick'em data and go from there. So, of course, my name is James Coburn. You can find my other work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well. If you have anybody to share it with, hit that notification button so that you're always reminded when I have another video that drops. And I will talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.